Okay, I've been wanting to do this video for quite some time because dust collection is something that I've become sort of obsessed with since getting into woodworking. The dust is probably one of the most difficult parts of being a woodworker for me, and I'm always looking for ways to have and to maintain a cleaner shop without having to put in a ton of effort of constantly cleaning it to stay on top of the dust. So if dust is something that kind of drives you crazy about woodworking, and you want to find solutions, then this is definitely the video for you. In this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 things that I use on a daily basis in my wood shop. And these are my favorite things and also the things that I found to be the most efficient at keeping the dust relatively under control in a very dusty activity. So this video, we're not going to do like in-depth reviews. Basically, I'm going to structure it as I'm going to tell you about the 5 things. I'm going to rate each of those 5 things out of 10. And then I'm going to tell you my personal pros and cons after using these tools or things on a regular basis over the past few years. So this isn't necessarily a video about what's the best in the business. We're not really talking much about brands. It's more just the idea of the thing and how it functions and how well it manages the dust. And all of these solutions are going to be a little bit more small shop oriented since that's what I have and that's what I'm using. And another thing I want to say before we get into the video and I show you all of the dirty, dusty corners of my wood shop is that my main business, my bread and butter is retail. So I'm actively using this space. It's not a beautiful YouTube studio. I wish it was, but it's not. It's a very heavily used dirty, dusty place, and you're going to be seeing all of those dirty, dusty corners. So please do not judge. Thank you. But as you're listening to this review, know that it's coming from a person that's using these things on a daily basis. And also I'm doing woodworking in my basement. So I'm extra trying to keep the dust under control because it's in my actual house. So just keep that in mind. But also, again, thanks for not judging the messiness that you're about to see. So the first thing we're going to talk about is this dust collector. So in my humble opinion, a machine like this is a non-negotiable for woodworkers. I started off, this is a Central Machinery 2 horsepower dust collector from Harbor Freight. It costs $300 just for the machine itself. I did upgrade the filter bag to a 1 micron filter. So that filter bag, I think it cost me around $30 on Amazon, and that was from PowerTech. And then the other thing is you'll have all of your hoses and the adapters and stuff that you'll need to connect it to all your different tools as well, which that cost can definitely add up. Or if you use pipes or whatever you use to run it throughout your workspace, that's a pretty significant expense, to be honest with you. But I just really feel that for big machines, for using big machines, like for example, my drum sander, I use it with my miter saw and I use it with my belt sander. Those are kind of the main things I'm using it with now, but it serves a lot of other functions as well. I don't personally have a table saw, so I'm not using that. But this dust collector really gets the job done. So I'm rating the dust collector 9 out of 10. Now I'm talking mostly about function, not necessarily like this brand is the best. Again, this is from Harbor Freight. So I started with a 1 horsepower dust collector from Harbor Freight, which is something that I just bought when I started doing woodworking after realizing how crazy the dust was, especially from my belt sander. So I bought the 1 horsepower from Harbor Freight. I definitely wouldn't recommend 1 horsepower. I don't think it's strong enough. I think you have to go at least 2. Because when the 1 horsepower broke after 2 years, it just stopped working. I bought the 2 horsepower. Again, I just went to Harbor Freight because I needed something immediately and I didn't even take the time to shop around or consider other options. But so far so good. I would probably buy something else next time if this, knock on wood, I don't want it to break, but there are definitely units that I have on my wish list, but those aren't going to happen anytime soon. But this works really well. So rating it 9 out of 10. Some of the pros for this dust collection is that it has the 4-inch hoses. So this really works the best for larger tools. And it is very efficient in that. You can see how much dust it collects. I'm emptying mine like about once a month. I'm filling a bag with dust, give or take. and it collects a ton of dust. If you're really seriously getting into woodworking, I would say that, you know, there's an entry-level machine like this one is $300. You can kind of like get into it at a relatively lower price point than other machines. So there's definitely different options at different price points. So I think that, again, to me, this is a non-negotiable. Now the cons, as I mentioned, you need at least 2 horsepower. So you really got to have the suction power. And the other thing is that it really works better if you can maintain the 4-inch opening. If you have to reduce it, which I do reduce it for my belt sander, but when you reduce it, it kind of reduces its efficiency. I'm not going to pretend like I know the science or whatever behind why it does that, but I've read a lot about it, and it seems from what I've gathered that reducing the opening, or, you know, using smaller hoses, it does kind of reduce the efficiency of this type of dust collector. And then again, as I mentioned, the last con is all of the money you have to spend in your hoses and your adapters and everything to get it set up initially. So there is a bit of an initial expense, certainly, but other than that, it doesn't really require a lot of upkeep. Sometimes this plastic bag will like get a rip in it or something and I have to replace it, but those you can get on Amazon. I think you can get 5 of them for like $20 or something like that. So again, this kind of dust collection, 9 out of 10, non-negotiable for me. Okay, the next thing we have is this miter saw Shroud. I think that's how you say it. Now I'm rating this an 8 out of 10, and that's rated purely on the function. And I do have a lot of cons to this one, which we'll get into. So this thing, I bought it on Amazon. It's expensive. It was $200. But, you know, I know there are a lot of people that like build something or build like a nice, beautiful miter saw station, which I would love to do that and love to have the space for it. But I already had this stand for my miter saw, if you can see it. And so I didn't want to spend all that money on supplies and material when I already have a stand, and I couldn't immediately figure out a way to build something that will work with my current stand. So I just bought this on Amazon. It had pretty good reviews, and it does work really well. You can connect it to your dust collection. It has a 4-inch outlet on the bottom, so it can connect directly to the dust collection. It really eliminates any of that dust that would otherwise be flying out of the back of the saw. So compared to anything else I've tried, and I've tried a lot of stuff, this has worked the best. And there's very minimal sawdust that goes flying out like it normally would when you use a miter saw. Now the cons. Again, my con list for this product is a little bit long. First of all, it's hideously ugly. This thing is so ugly. Also, it takes up a lot of space. And this thing actually makes me kind of hate my miter saw because I just think it looks so ugly. But that's just purely aesthetic, and maybe it's just me. The other thing that I don't like about it is that it's expensive. $200 for this thing is expensive. I mean, you know, it's made in the US. I'm sure this is a great company and everything like that, but $200 is expensive. And the other thing is that as I've used this, like I've only had this for probably about a year, but you can see I have it tied up here because the frame like really started to kind of weaken, and I don't know if it bent or whatever it is. I haven't done a full diagnostic on it because, again, you know, like I have to focus on the bread and butter and making money and doing the things that pay the bills. So I don't have like a lot of time to give the TLC to like figuring out why this shroud isn't working anymore. So that's kind of annoying that, you know, I just found that it keeps falling backwards, and I need it to be forward so that it's really collecting all of that dust. Otherwise it's like the dust is still kind of flying out the side. So that's kind of annoying. And again, maintenance isn't my strong suit when it comes to maintaining tools and stuff like that. But I just feel like it should have like held up a little bit better than it has for the price. The other annoying thing is that when you connect it to your dust collection, if your dust collection has like a pretty just good amount of suction power, it's gonna suck the material in the bottom, and so the material is going to end up getting sucked into your hose. So the hole actually gets closed up at the bottom, and it's not allowing the dust to go into your dust collector. So I had to kind of just, you know, rig it up a little bit to make it so that there wasn't so much loose fabric down there, which again is kind of annoying, to spend $200 and it's still kind of like not working perfectly. But again, it's just, it works the best of anything that I've tried, despite all of its drawbacks. Okay, the next thing is this Wen Air Scrubber. I bought this early on in my woodworking journey when I was using my 1 horsepower dust collector and it just wasn't really doing the job. So I came across this and I was like, hey, like air scrubber, that sounds like it's gonna do an amazing job. So I bought it. This is $130. And to be honest, it didn't work as well as I thought it would. I kind of had higher expectations for it. So I'm rating this a 6 out of 10. Now, the pros for this one is that it does definitely do something, especially for that little fine dust that will be just floating around the air. It certainly helps with that. And the other pro that I'm giving this machine is that there's very little upkeep. I've never replaced the filters, even though it's just like, it's cardboard here and it's a little bit cheap, but you can just vacuum it out. And it needs vacuum now, but it's pretty easy just to clean up and keep using the same filter. And then it has these inside too. Again, everything of mine needs a thorough cleaning, which probably isn't gonna happen anytime soon, but it does have these filters inside. There's never usually much on my inside filters for me. Mine got a little bit like black because I was using my airbrush, and so like the paint fumes or whatever it is, like it stained them a little bit. That's why they look that way, but it's pretty good. I mean, you can definitely tell a little bit of a difference when you're using it. The other thing I like about it is that it has a timer on it. So if you're doing something, if you're doing like heavy sanding or something, and that, you know, that really fine dust, it can just kind of stay in the air for a long time. So you can set this on a timer for, I think 1 hour is the lowest amount of time. So you can let it run on the timer when you're finished up and you finish things up in your shop, and let it run, and it will kind of clean out that last little bit. So it's good for that. It's definitely not really like you must go buy it now, but I like it. Now, I will say that mine isn't in the most optimal place because my shop is so small. I really probably will move it. The back side of it is relatively close to the wall, so that might kind of affect its function a little bit. But I do notice that it helps a little bit. And again, as I mentioned, not a lot of upkeep. You're not going to have to spend a ton of money on filters or anything like that. But again, not as life-changing as I thought it would be. So 6 out of 10 for the air scrubber. Okay, the fourth thing is just this simple little thing, which probably we all have by now. It's a box fan with just a filter attached to it. This is, honestly, for me, this is a 9 out of 10. Again, it serves its function really well. I keep it here at the end of my belt sander, and it just picks up all that extra dust that's flying off the belt sander that isn't going into the dust collector. It's super cheap, gets the job done. There are much more expensive benchtop dust collectors. I certainly have my eye on some of them. I would love to have them, but I can do this for 20 or 30 bucks, or I can spend $600 on something else. And so it just, you know, it just hasn't really made sense so far. But I like this. It's very easy. Mine is nothing fancy. I just have, literally the filter is tied around the fan with a rope. It's not glamorous, but it gets the job done. My only con about this, again, as I mentioned, it's not beautiful, obviously. It's, you know, it could be a lot more beautiful, but, and I've seen some people make some really beautiful ones, so maybe someday I'll do that, but to be honest with you, it's probably not gonna happen. But the other thing is, I'm just annoyed of myself that I forget to buy new filters. You can vacuum it off pretty well, but over time, like, you'll just want new filters, and I always forget to buy it, so that's the only con for me. Okay, so we saved the big dog for last. This is the Festool CT36 dust extractor with the ETS EC125 3EQ. Their names are like outrageous. Orbital Sander. I love this. This is like 10 out of 10 for me. I used to have a DeWalt Orbital Sander, and the dust that it produced, even though I tried to use it with my dust collector, it it wasn't efficient at all. This thing is a beast, and it collects so much, almost honestly all of the dust that this thing produces, the dust extractor will capture it. So the downside to this, obviously, is that it's very expensive. So it took me a long time before I decided to invest in this dust extractor and Orbital Sander, but I would literally never turn back. It's just one of those things that has been completely worth the investment. So far, I really only use the dust extractor with the Orbital Sander. Again, in terms of just tools that I use, I have a pretty simple operation. I also do use the dust extractor with my Craig track saw. I got an adapter so that I can use it with that. For that, it works pretty well, but I noticed that the track saw still, there's a lot of dust that kind of goes flying out of the front of the saw. So if anybody has any advice on that, I would love to hear your suggestions, because I feel like that's one of the final things that's like really producing a lot of dust in my shop is the track saw, but it's not something that I use really heavily. So the Festool dust extractor was $875. The sander was $475. I got the Bluetooth remote, which was $88. I bought a bunch of sanding paper in different grits. I got about 300 sheets, $200. It's definitely an investment. It's a lot of money, and it's something that I personally use very heavily, so it was worth it for me. And it's worked truly amazing. And then I forgot to also mention, you need also the filter bags, which is what collects the dust inside of the extractor. And those come in a pack of 5. For this particular machine, the 5-pack is $53. So this is gonna be one of those machines where there's a lot of costs. I would say I've had this machine for probably 6 months, and my 300 sheets of sandpaper, like, I've barely put a dent in it. It's gonna last me easily a year, probably even longer than that. I don't really know. I find that the sandpaper lasts a lot longer than other stuff that I was using when I was using the DeWalt. So that's nice. But again, there's just a lot of costs involved in it, but it works so amazing. Sometimes I see people using an Orbital Sander with no dust, with just the bag, which I used to do that with my DeWalt. I would just use the little bag that it came with, and I was just like, I would come out of the shop, out of a sanding session, just literally covered in dust, and I can't go back there. So I have to invest in things that will help with the dust, and this is the GOAT for sure. So it's really efficient. It's very easy to change out the filter bag. The filter bag even feels very fancy itself. I don't know about you guys, but when I take my filter bag out when it's filled with dust, I almost want to just like use it as a pillow or something like that. It feels too nice to just throw it away. So I have loved it, but again, I only use it with the Orbital Sander, so I don't have a lot of experience using the dust extractor with a lot of other tools, but I feel like with smaller tools, if you can get it to connect and you have the right adapters and stuff like that, I feel like it would probably work really well with other smaller tools as well. So a lot of pros to this machine. The con is basically just the financial aspect and the upkeep and the investment that it will continue to need with your filter bags and stuff like that. But if you get the larger capacity one, I got the 36, and I probably have to change mine. If I'm using it really like heavily, I'm probably changing it maybe once every month or two for the filter bag. If I use it with the track saw, I find that it fills up a lot faster. So maybe if I'm using heavy track saw, then probably more like closer to changing it every month. But recently I've just been strictly using it with the Orbital Sander, and also since I got my drum sander, I'm using a lot less filter bags on this because I'm spending a lot less time on my Orbital Sander as well. So I guess that I didn't really realize it until it just kind of dawned on me right now that that's probably what's helping me to not fill up the dust extractor as fast. Again, those are my 5 dust collection tools or methods for a small shop, and I hope this video was helpful to you. And if you have other advice or tips, I'd love to hear those in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.